Hi, welcome back to GuyShrink. I'm Bill Roman, host here, and we're in Toledo, Ohio, and I'm recording in my office here at the house, and I have a really good buddy today. I mean, a great friend. We've been together as friends probably almost 30 years, and it's been a fabulous friendship over the years where we take each other's inventory sometimes, but more importantly are able to check each other's. That's not a very good thought you're having there, Roman. Dan Schaefer, clinical psychologist here in the Toledo area, great clinician, very good friend. And we've been doing some talking about an interesting topic that both of us have wrestled with over our lives, and it's revenge. What do you do with people who hurt you? And there is that saying, hurt people, but we've got some practical applications about that we want to talk about today. And really, and some new science has been, and some new research has been out there on the science of revenge, which has been really kind of interesting. There's a researcher, and we'll talk about it in a minute, about he calls it a behavior addiction. And there's an addictive quality to harboring resentments and seeking revenge. So Dan, welcome back. You've been here before. Welcome back to GuyShrink. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate being asked and anxious to jump into this subject.
Right on. So as we begin every episode of GuyShrink, what keeps a guy awake at night? I mean, what keeps you awake at night?
My best friend, anxiety. That'll keep most of us awake at a middle.
Right. My best friend.
But I'll tell you, I just done a casual survey. I mean, we talked last week, just sort of outlining what we want to talk about today. And a couple of people asked me, what's this thing you're doing Friday and blah, blah, blah. Or if they didn't, I just sort of out of the blue would say to some of my support staff and some of my therapists, I said, so what comes to your mind when you think about revenge? Out of the blue, no setup, right? I just everybody had something to say.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They thought for a minute and that's not your typical question. It's not like saying, how's your mother? It's a little penetrating, but everybody had something to say. They just thought for a minute and then take off. So I just found that kind of interesting because when you and I spoke last week, we kind of stumbled onto the word, if I remember right, and then we couldn't get off of it.
Well, that is interesting. Really, I don't even remember how we got started in that conversation. I think I asked you, hey, what keeps you awake at night? And you said, something like, well, guys either never talk or can't shut up. And then you said, we only talk with guys that are aligned to our way of thinking. Right. And then you kind of remembered, I think you heard an NPR thing on the Hidden Brain. That's a show on the NPR called The Hidden Brain. And a neuropsychologist, I think, is the host there. Yeah. And you heard that this other guy started talking about revenge. And that started you and I off on a large tangent.
That's right.
So other than anxiety, excuse me, go ahead.
Well, I came across the video. A client gave it to me and said, hey, this has been very, very helpful to me. If you get some time, listen to this. So I did. And I learned quickly why he sent it to me because I know you've listened to it since, it started to explain why this revenge business, it's sort of like we don't want to talk about it, but everybody knows it, and why it's so universal. Because it just seems to be, if you have a pulse and you're human, you probably have had an experience with revenge. And the one thing that came to me, and Bill, you might appreciate this after that, was there's something delicious about telling the story of how somebody wronged you.
Absolutely. I call that resentment. I think resentment gives us the narrative, the story, the delicious story about how I've been harmed and why it's, a grievous thing against me.
Yeah.
And why I am justified in retaliating, sweet revenge, why I'm justified because this person, whatever they did was the worst thing on the face of the earth and they deserve to be punished. And I can't wait for God or some other higher being, whatever, to do it. I'll take care of it.
And right. God, leave this one to me. I got this one. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So
you're right. Yeah. I think it's kind of like a floor mat or an entrance into retaliation. I think you're exactly right. It's sort of the mindset. If you get that thing going and you crank it up and you relish it and you taste it over and over again, I think you march right into this with like gigantic justification, almost indignation, righteousness. I mean, you almost feel like you're, God's hand on the earth. And I think that propels people into ruining relationships.
No, I absolutely agree with that. Now, we're referring to a video of that interview on The Hidden Brain featuring a man named James Kimmel, who's written an absolutely fantastic book. I've just started reading it, thanks to you, Dan, and it's called The Science of Revenge. And he interestingly enough, he's a lawyer, former lawyer, attorney, and big name kind of corporation, lots of litigation, lots of money, lots of anger, lots of retaliation in his profession. And I think he came to a come to Jesus moment about that and decided, I can't do this anymore. But he relates in that video a personal story. Dan, do you remember that personal story that he related about?
Yeah, right. He was bullied as a kid. I think it might have been elementary school, junior high, something like that. And he plotted a revenge. And he stopped at the last minute because I believe the story, if I'm right, he went as far as to get a handgun.
Yes, he had a gun. He actually pointed it to a bunch of it, so to speak, neighbor guys that were bullying him. I'm going to show those people.
Yes, exactly. And then, like your reference to the prodigal son in the New Testament, he literally came to his senses. He came to himself, and he turned away. And that was sort of the beginning of his research and his career path, really.
Really interesting. A bullied guy is going to bully back, so to speak, but he's gonna do more than just be called names and push people down. He's gonna take them out. Seriously, he had a gun. I think it was his dad's or his grandfather's gun, and drove up to the house where these guys were at, and it's night, and so the lights in the car are shining on these guys. They can't see him, but he had this gun pointed to them. And he said in a flash of a moment, if I remember rightly, I thought, what will my life be like if I pull the trigger? Now that's coming to your senses, because a whole new story is going to get told if he pulls the trigger. So he got back in the car shaking, he said, and drove home. And that was kind of the beginning of a changed mindset. Now, he continued on a career, but I think that incident set something up for him in his conscience later on down the road to say, I can't do this thing anymore.
Yeah. Right. I will be very interested to see where that podcast goes, because it was riveting. I mean, because I think that strikes a chord with everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody.
It may not be a gun, and it may not be the actual physical, acting. It's the thought that takes us to the physical, the rehearsing of the scene that's going to happen, and all of and I'm going to live happily ever after kind of thing.
Right.
What I find intriguing about the book that I've done a little bit, and you and I've talked about neurobiology over the years, is that he is citing in his book about 15 years worth of research about what happens to the human brain when we get into certain patterns of behavior.
Yeah.
And he noted, and this was specifically stuff done on aggression and sweet revenge and some other things, that the significant amount of dopamine that gets secreted in our brain, the feel good chemical that we all want, and how much that gets secreted in our brain to make us feel good, take away the temporary pain, equating it with the same intensity as a drug addict would have, like 2 lines of cocaine.
And I don't think the slow rush of a drink, I think it's more like cocaine. I mean, the pleasure curve goes up quickly with this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And he even says, Mr. Kimmel even says, he calls it a behavior addiction, that aggression and revenge, and revenge is more than just, it's a whole narrative thing. It's a long process of revenge. Revenge is a long process, that every move gives me more and more dopamine. Every move gives more and more dopamine. And then it's become addictive. I mean, they've kind of done neurological studies. Addicts have a tremendous amount of dopamine in their system when they're acting out in such a fashion. And I think it's a significant insight to be able to say that anger leading to aggressive behavior, leading to revenge, is an addiction.
Right. Yeah. Listen, I've been around for a while, and that's the first time anybody that I can remember really put those things together. Maybe briefly as a metaphor,
Huh?
but I've just been chewing on this for a week or two, and I think he's absolutely right. The other thing that he pointed out that I thought was brilliant was what happens after the high, after the rush. And it's kind of understandable, but it's like ask a drunk who woke up after a hangover. It's like what comes up must come down. I mean, all the drug analogy curves that I've seen is that if some substance takes you up above the line pretty considerably, well, when it wears off, then you're going down below the mean and you're in some kind of miserable state.
Yes.
And
Yes.
at least in the drug and alcohol models, is that kind of sets you up for your next drink.
Yes. 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 And so I'm hearing is the parallel, as you say, aggression is an addictive behavior.
Yes.
And he even goes as far as he calls it I think he calls it the world's most uncontrolled addiction, the world's deadliest addiction. That's what he calls it, the world's deadliest addiction worldwide. And then he cites, some that we are familiar with, many geopolitical things, but the research is phenomenal that he cites as an addiction.
Right. And that's all that stuff was brand new to me. Now, but the other thing I've been thinking since we first talked was movies, Hollywood. And I was thinking about different movies that I've watched and what's popular and why. And so I Googled revenge movies.
Oh, really? Oh, whoa.
And there were lists, 50, 75 movies long, and let me give you a couple titles. I haven't seen most of these. A couple towards the end I've actually watched. But you ready for these titles? Well, there's a movie called Revenge.
Okay.
Ready? Of course. Payback, Killer of Killers. These are all movies. Kill Bill 1 and 2.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
All day. All the John Wick stuff.
Yeah.
Grizzly 2, Revenge. That's a movie. Godfather, The Equalizer, Gladiator. Those are all movies of revenge, and some of them I have not heard of, but all of them made money.
Oh, big time. Yeah, I'm thinking of Schwarzenegger stuff. The Terminator and so on and forth. And I go, yeah, I love that. And what's up with me? I'm not saying we should all. I'm gonna cancel. I'm never gonna listen to that again. But there's something going on inside of me, and I can get excited too about that.
What's the draw? So I have a confession to make. So there's not a famous movie, but I remember watching it. It's 5 or 10 years old, called Rob Roy. And
yes, I remember that. Yes.
Liam Neeson, blah, blah, blah. And in the end, there's a sword fight. And Rob Roy is kind of a clumsy, oaf of a guy compared to this wealthy, well-trained swordsman. And he slowly just starts to, it's almost as if it seemed like Monty Python, lopping limbs off. Come back here, you chicken. But he slowly starts to dismantle him. It's humiliating, and it's just oh man, it's. I thought this guy's a goner. The good guy is going to leave, and at the very end, he grabs the guy's door and just and cuts his sternum right open. What I'm embarrassed to tell you is, I rented that. We had it on video or whatever. I went back and watched that scene a couple times, and I was cheering, because after the movie, you hated that guy so much, and he finally got what he deserved. So that maybe you call that justice. I don't know, whatever, but there is a revenge element. Why on earth would I go back and watch that more than once?
Now that's very interesting. Is it you use the word justice, Dan, which I think that's interesting because Mr. Kimmel, he's a doctor, he's a JD. Dr. Kimmel, as an attorney, it would be working in justice. And so he's, concerned about justice, and that is retaliation and revenge. Is that another word for justice? He's making us think. Certainly made me think, oh, this is tough stuff, And of course, you read something like that, and that clicks on all kinds of triggers inside, at least inside of me, about, oh yeah, I remember when I did this. I remember this, and I remember a particular incident in my own life. Somebody had really, they were very unfair, and they deserve everything they got. And I remember getting a cord of wood because we had a wood burning stove in the basement at this house we had, and I would chop wood, and I had that beautiful axe from Sears, the Craftsman, one of the best axes out there, and with every blow, another head would roll, kind of thing, and 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 I went through that whole cord of wood and I split that whole damn cord of wood. And you know what? I didn't feel any better, which I found amazing. And it's because everybody's, oh, just, you'll get it out. You'll get it out. I believe that getting it out only creates more to get out.
Well, in fact, there was a time this is cringeworthy, but in our profession, they're trying to figure out how can we bring a close to domestic violence? How do we educate, treat, whatever, these men who put their wives in the hospital? And in the history of attempts to figure out this wrinkle, they came up with ventilative therapies. Oh, there was a time in Psychology Today where you could buy something called an encounter bat.
Oh, really?
It had a little handle, and at the end of the handle, there was this fluffy foam thing. And so you go into group therapy and beat the crap out of, the other guy that was paying $50 an hour to sit with a therapist, right? And of course, I mean, it has some face validity. Okay, you can get it out. I mean, it sort of makes sense. But what they found is not only did it not work, it made things worse.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting, Dan, that was a treatment that we used. And found out it didn't help people at all. I think revenge, we get the idea that if I take care of this, I'll feel better about it. And as you said, and Dr. Kimball's stuff says it doesn't make you feel better.
No. At the moment, there is a rush, and then you're going through a drug withdrawal state.
Yeah, for sure. And well, you literally are. And the dopamine is so great,
right,
that you crash and burn is what happens.
Exactly.
I find it really intriguing about revenge and being an addiction. And I know as a fellow clinician with you, I've seen people who anger's a big retaliation, particularly, couples fighting and all those kind of, because a couple fight is really about revenge. I'm going to fix her, I'll fix him kind of thing. And just the idea of, well, how much joy do you get out of hurting that's so-and-so? And people hear that and go, what do you mean joy? Oh, yeah, the dopamine creates such a high in us, then it makes us feel good, even though we're doing something not so good. Well, you're a clinician. What's been some of your experience with some of the people who come in to see you as far as aggression, moving towards revenge, or maybe even practice?
Sometimes in couples therapy, sometimes just in individual therapy. But I ran these domestic violence groups for 10 years. Yeah. One of my favorite stories, we would have a protocol. So a new guy comes into the group. There's usually about 10 guys in the group. And we go around the room and introduce ourselves and say, here's why we're here. On this date, I did this to my wife. And, we just had a protocol. So the new guy would come in, do the same thing, except he had one more requirement. He had to tell his story. Like, what was what we call the index incident. So, hi, I'm Fred, blah, blah, blah. I got arrested 2 weeks ago, and they would tell us what happened. And then by that time, most of the guys in our group are pretty smart, and I know how to ask questions. And of course, what the latest guy that came in didn't know is that I had the police report. And so most jurisdictions, if there's been a domestic violence, they get at least 2 cops come up and separate the people. They get statements. And then they make an arrest based on those 2 statements right there. So they get at least 2, sometimes 3 looks at it, but it's really increased the accuracy of the arrests dramatically, instead of a he said. Sure. So this guy tells a story about something that happened, and he said, I walked over to, there was apparently a bookcase with stereos on it, like the 2, and they had combined, he and his girlfriend had combined their stereo. So there's this big bookcase, 2 stereos and bookcases, books all over the place. And he said he lost control. And I said, what happened when you lost control? He said, I reached over and grabbed her stereo and threw it out the window. I burst out laughing. And half the guys also burst out laughing. I said, wait a second. You grabbed hers and yours was right there. And there's possessions of yours. So you were so out of control that you were able to carefully select her stereo and throw it out through the window. And of course, that was his first clue that he did not lose control. He was trying to gain control through intimidation and revenge.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah. So that was sort of unfortunately for him, it was a little bit of a breakthrough because none of us were buying what he had been telling his girlfriend for a couple of years.
Sure. Sure. I'm sure he showed up. First of all, he was court mandated. That's
And
the
he had to shut up.
yeah, it was the first thing. But I'm sure he thought, I'll just say I'm a bad guy. Dan will agree, and then he'll sign this paper off, and then I can go. And it didn't work out that way. Yeah, that's really interesting. I was thinking about my work with recovering addicts, particularly alcoholic guys, in a 12-step program, and it's interesting that the fourth step in 12 steps is fearless and moral inventory.
Yeah.
And then they basically call that list your resentments. At least with guys that are working that step, they say list your resentments down. And the literature of AA says resentment is the chief offender. That's the problem that's underlying the drinking, is that the urge, the need for revenge, and then of course resentment is the story that rationalizes why I need to take revenge.
Yeah, or drink or whatever. Yeah.
Well, exactly.
I love the AA tradition. That's a brilliant, brilliant moment about really trying to explore people's own sense of revenge, because it's always a data-rich step.
Well, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
It's really
sit down and just write that down. And this is let's list all the times you messed up. That's not what it's about. What it's about is list the stuff that that angers you or you're resentful about, and then look to see what kind of personality or character formation has happened to you out of this list of resentments and anger that you've had. What kind of man have you become out of that?
Right.
And if I look at it, I'm a grudge-filled, resentful person. You're on a track that's really self-destruction is what it is.
Yeah. Now, there's a parallel to this that I've been thinking about since we spoke. I don't think we talked about this last time, but in our field, there are some diagnostic categories that we call personality disorders. And they are different than like if you're depressed or if you're anxious and stuff like that. Those conditions kind of come and go. There's a whole category in the DSM that talk about personality disorders. And what all they are is enduring ways of functioning in the world, of thinking and relating and feeling in the world that endure across time. So it's not like I'm depressed this afternoon, or if I was this kind of a person that I was there until Friday hit and then I'm fine. No, these are enduring. And there's one in particular that I've been thinking about since we spoke, and most people have heard about it. It's called a borderline personality disorder. And I would think of all the different ways to be a little off as a human being, revenge seems to be a huge part of that diagnosis.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think it goes like this, is the person that you were in a relationship, like if I'm the revenge-filled person, when I'm in that state and I'm looking at the person who hurt me, all I see is what they did. It's like they become unidimensional. They used to be a nice person. Well, now they became bad. It's not sort of, they're all bad.
Okay.
And I think what happens then is that once this person's all bad, then unleashes all that justification for revenge, hateful, ways to pay back and gossip about that person and just bring them down in any way you can. And so I think there's a revenge element when you look at all the different ways to be kind of troubled as a human being. I think that might be one of the behavioral specialties of the borderline personality disorder, where it's black and white. And I think if you're in the middle of a revenge frenzy, then it's real easy to retaliate because they're just a piece of crap. They're not a human anymore. They used to be good and now they're completely bad.
Well, that gives me permission then to act the way I do against them then, because they're all this way. They're always this way. Dan, I never put together, I'm just with you, I've never put together the idea that borderline personality disorders, a big chunk of that is revenge seeking. That is really a great insight. Thank you.
Yeah. And the other thing that I thought of, and it's all your fault because we talked last week and you put all these evil ideas in my head. There was a guy, I went to this convention years ago and heard this guy named John Gartner speak. I think it's Gartner, John Gartner. He had just, in one of our journals, he'd come out with a piece entitled The Incapacity to Forgive.
Ooh.
The Incapacity to Forgive. Yeah. And he started out with just a story about a client of his and the conversations that they had in the office. And if he didn't say right off, but it was a borderline personality. And, if what he was saying, well, that person, that they're so offended by stuff that when they are offended, everybody else looks like Hitler.
Okay.
Therefore, that renders them incapable of being a forgiving person.
Wow. That sounds like a very interesting research or article.
And that was
well worth reading. I want to circle back to forgiveness in a minute because because I'm hearing Dr. Kimball say, you raise up your head. Well, what are we going to do about revenge? And his answer really is, well, forgiveness is it. And
right.
But I want to come back to that in a minute. But I do want to ask you about something about you said personality disorders are enduring traits. Is that what you said? Enduring
ways of thinking, feeling, and acting across time. I mean,
okay, so
ways that kind of endure across time.
If I'm an addict, that's an enduring quality about me.
Yeah, that's true.
That doesn't go away. And it's not like I'm an alcoholic and I woke up, I'm not going to do that anymore. There's work that has to be done. And that's an enduring habit. Behavioral habit is really what I think he's talking about here. Behavioral addiction. Revenge is behavioral addiction is an enduring habit. So my personality is habitually towards seeking revenge for me, making me feel better. And that dopamine just adds to you're in your, righteous anger. You have every right to do this. I can't tell you how many clients I have to say, I have every right to express my emotions and tell her how horrible she is. And I go, well, who says you have a right to do that?
Right.
Exactly. Did she agreed to you that you had a right to tell her she's a terrible person?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I just find that interesting, this connection that you've made with borderline personality and revenge. And I'm just thinking about, man, this is a behavioral habit. So much to the place that it becomes an enduring quality of my personality. Yeah.
Exactly.
You're one of the.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you're one of the few clinicians I know that really has a great grasp on personality disorders. What used to be called Axis 2, and they're alive and well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you really got great insight into that, Dan. So.
Well, I wish, and earlier in my career, I wish I diagnosed them sooner, because if you don't diagnose that early, you think they don't have one, and it turns out that they do, and you miss it. You should have done a deeper dive on the diagnostics, didn't do it, and you just think, oh, this is, he's fine, she's fine, we're going to get through this. And then you find out, holy smokes, I missed it. That's one of my biggest therapeutic failures, is a work with a couple of years with somebody who turned out what was in fact borderline, and I completely miss it. So it's kind of it's something to watch for now. So
sure, of course, when they're in your office and they like you, you're not going to get that. You're not going to get that side of them.
Yeah, right. Now I don't want to get too clinical, but in fact, it's camouflaged on the front end. So I was young enough to miss a statement like, well, I've been to 5 therapists and they none of them understood me. But, I've only been here 20 minutes and you understand me more than any of these other people have. And you start to think, well, I really got this thing going, don't I? I said, okay,
right.
Okay, do this. So it was kind of a disaster. So,
well, let's circle back now to that article that Dr. Gardner wrote about the incapability of forgiving. So yeah. Dr. Cable says forgiveness is the answer to that. So how do you understand forgiveness in the role of managing revenge differently?
Okay, well, I dug up. Already, this is a book from mid 90s. There it is.
Oh yeah, Lewis Smedes. Yeah.
Yeah, I even have a signed copy. So
okay,
I heard him speak at it's called a Christian Association for Psychological Studies professional meeting in Grand Rapids in like 95, something like that, and just blew me out of the water. He was fabulous. I took my notes, put them in this, bought his book, got a signature, put my notes right in here, put it on my bookshelf. 10 years later, He came back to the convention and spoke again, same title. I took copious notes, was thrilled, all geeked out. And when I came back to the office, I took my new notes. I was going to store them in the book, and out fell my old notes.
Okay.
And I put them beside each other, and it was the exact same talk. So either I'm brain dead or whatever, but what my takeaway from that, it was such an enduring presentation that just because I was forgetful, the fact of the matter is I felt like I was hearing it again for the first time, and it was just as impactful. And so
we're hearing it again for the first time. I absolutely believe that. Absolutely. Yes.
And so what he did was he said, look, everybody talks about forgiveness, even if you're not inside the church or ever cracked in the New Testament, but he says, but everybody understands the concept. But he said, all right, this is some of the aspects of what it's like if you've been injured. Now we're talking about the other, when you're receiving an injustice. This is sort of, he used the words, I'm going to take you through the thickets of how complex this can be.
Okay.
And he had a couple brilliant takeaways. And he used the language of surrender. And he said that, if you're really interested in letting somebody off the hook, here's some of this is how you're moving along the way. But first, he told some fabulous stories about, I remember one about some guy remember when there was 12-step inpatient programs all over the country for 30 days. And, there's a lot of money and they're making a lot of money. Well, he was this very famous Christian author who had a failed business relationship, then his failed marriage, and he ended up a drunk. And he's in an inpatient unit down in Texas. And this is the story he writes later. And he said, my wife, this, and my business all started with my business partner, that SOB, blah, 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 blah. He went on and on and on. And he said, with his punching his fist into his palm, I just can't let this guy off the hook. And a 19-year-old kid looked at him and said, off the hook? What are you talking about? You know where he is right now? He's not playing golf.
Ooh, I wasn't expecting that. I thought he was feeling remorseful for what he did to me.
No, he's fine. So in other words, you're going to look what your resentment got you. What your resentment got, now you're a drunk.
Yes.
And you're in an expensive inpatient program and you're still, going off about this other guy. He's fine. You got to get and that was the turning point for him when he reached bottom, as they say. And that was his bottom that he ended up getting his life back together. So I think that's difficult because what you have to do in order to start to forgive someone is to give up your right to get even.
Amen to that. Yeah. Giving you that, like, wow. That's major sacrifice, though. See,
it is.
I mean, it means giving up the whole story, which is interesting. There's been some other, I don't want to say research, but some writing that equates forgiveness with the process that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross used way back when she talked about on death and dying, which this was the original stuff on death and dying. And she talked about those 5 stages that she observed in her patients. Again, it's not clinical. She didn't run any tests or anything. This is all observational data. And she saw that when you got to a certain place, giving up life was acceptance was giving up life. And what we do in forgiveness is, we work through some stages, is what this person who was writing this said. But in the end, what we're really trying to do is we're the process of dying to a hurt self, giving up our identity as a hurt self. And I have invested 25 years into being hurt by so-and-so. And by golly, that's a lot of investment to say, I no longer need to have that. And that's and that's what I think happens with revenge. It's the absolute, I am not going to do that. I'm not going to give up this. I'm going to get a solution my way. Yeah. It's not going to work.
Yeah. It's, when you hear somebody's story, there's plenty of tragedies in the world, plenty of, and they do need somebody to listen to them. That is absolutely true. But what does it mean if somebody's telling the same stinking story, for 15 years It's like pretty soon you meet somebody and they end up telling this story. And usually I give people the benefit of the doubt, in and outside the office. But if I find out that they've told that same story to 200 people before they got to me, and there is no change, then I start to think, there's something delicious about her telling that story, or him. And it's not good. They're stuck. They're still where they were 20 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, I like your word delicious. I think it's exactly describes the injection of dopamine. It's delicious.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I didn't connect that until you said that earlier, but I think it is a connection. So that first thing about with Smeets, and this is why he was so brilliant, that, you got to surrender that. You say, listen, the retaliation, the revenge thing, I'm just going to have to let go of that. This is getting me nowhere. It's leading me to drink. It's just all sorts of stuff. And then the other thing is, and I think this is particularly true and with a borderline person, is, part of their difficulty is they look at people in terms of black and white, good and bad. No percentages here. It's all whole numbers. It's either 0 or 1. And when somebody really takes it to us and takes us to the carpet and knocks the wind out of us, our first response is almost borderline like. If somebody's really hurt you, they whether they meant to or not, they did. They're not repenting, and they just really hurt you or your family. I think I could hurt my daughter, my wife. I might have to be arrested. I might be able to take a punch, but there's such an enormous first reaction. And part of that first reaction is that you don't look at that person as, oh, they probably had a bad day. No, they're an SOB through and through. And so part of what Smeets says, and this is brilliant, he says, part of the way you're on the way is that some of those likely good human qualities start to come back into your field of view. Maybe trickle, maybe not. But you start to see that your view of them was tainted by the emotionality of the offense, and in fact might not really be true for the long run. And so Smeets says, well, how do you know you're on your way? Well, when you could see, okay, he was a jerk as a businessman, but boy, is he sweet to his kids, and he's a good baseball coach. I mean, you could start to see some aspects, and I think that tells us in some ways, I think I'm surrendering my right to get even, and I'm kind of searching for maybe he only has a few good qualities, but I'm going to try to find them.
What you're saying right there, I really like that second idea there about searching for the qualities. I'm reminded as you were talking, I think it's James Clear in his book Atomic Habits, I think, but doing some research on the formation of habits. Again, if having a grudge and having revenge is a habit, a behavioral habit, that means it's similar to in that same kind of idea about I can't help myself. I do it without thinking. And he was doing some work in habits and discovered that, at least for him in his work, that there's a little formula to having a habit. There's a cue, a CUE, there's a trigger, a cue, and then there's an acting out. Mm-hmm. So hit me, I'm going to hit them back, kind of thing. And so he was working with people who wanted to stop smoking because they had tried a bunch of the patch and gum and all that. And so what's the cue? Well, the cue for a lot of cigarette smokers is eating. After I eat, I want to have a cigarette. And so he got some people together that wanted to stop smoking, and they tried this thing, and it was okay. The first week, I think this is how it went. The first week, after you eat, go have a cigarette. The second week, after you eat, smoke a half a cigarette. So we're going to do the titration thing. The third week, after you eat, go brush your teeth first, and then go have a cigarette. And I was just intrigued by the fact that not everybody stopped, but many people go out, well, heck, I just brushed my teeth. Why would I go when I have a cigarette? But what he's trying to get at is putting something similar to brushing your teeth and seeing if you still act out. So before you get the gun or whatever it is to retaliate, maybe you could do something like brushing your teeth. And it might be, Dan really roils me up. But, there's something good about him, too. Slow the reactivity down, slow the reactive process down is what I think this research is trying to get at. And if it's in other words, stop the dopamine before it gets too, yeah, interrupt that and see what happens. And I think that's the work of forgiveness. It's interrupting that cycle of continued hostility and revenge.
Well, it also speaks of intention, because Smedes, again, I wish this stuff was my own, but I got to, this is all his stuff. I'm stealing, massively from his book, but he was talking about the difficulty of this forgiveness. He had this one funny part of his presentation. Apparently there was a police officer that mistreated his own son. And he's saying, "I forgive you, Officer O'Malley. I forgive you." He's just really wrestling that. And it reminds me of Joseph at the end of Genesis.
Oh, yeah.
When, remember, as you would know this more than anybody I know, he got thrown into a ditch, left for dead. Then years later, he's in a position of power and his whole family's screwed, right? And they come back to them, and he realizes who they are. And it says, he went in, this is really interesting to me. He went into the other room and he was in agony.
Yeah.
And crying so loud that people could hear him. And then he got himself cleaned up and sent them on their way. And then the second time they came back, he had this extremely strong emotional reaction. And that was the beginning of reconciliation and restitution. Like, it was terrible. They thought to kill them, right? And I think that it is a picture of forgiveness. I don't think this is easy business at all. I mean, when you let go of a resentment, it might feel like the tearing of flesh, it might even feel wrong. It's just wrong to let him off the hook.
Yeah.
What Smead says is, when you forgive someone, and this is his premise at the beginning, you're setting a prisoner free. And the prisoner is you. Yes,
that's correct. That's correct. There's I think it's a Zen saying that says, when you plan revenge, dig 2 graves.
Exactly. I remember that. So, my favorite line from A Princess Bride.
Oh, wow.
Fabulous movie. At the end, the 6-figured man is dead, and they're kind of reminiscing about what now, and Manny Patinkin says, Inigo Montoya says, well, there's not much future in revenge, I'm like, I'm going to have to fight.
How about that wonderful quote? Let's draw this place to a close today. Dan, it's been a great conversation. It's always great to talk with you. This has been a meaty topic, and you sent me in some directions I hadn't even thought of before when you first posed the issue about revenge. And just we were just talking, and it came up.
Yeah. So, that's exactly what happened.
Which was just great. And so, of course, we're in an elevator. We're going to go somewhere, a couple floors, and the door's closed, and you and I are in the elevator together. And I'm stuck with you. What is your elevator speech? What is one thing you want to say to me to make it would be memorable? That I could take home a nugget of what you've said.
You mean on this topic?
Whatever. Yeah, on this topic. If you got on this topic. Yeah.
Oh boy, you got me there.
I think you. Hey, there ain't much future in revenge.
I'm gonna go with Inigo Montoya. It's like, let's find another career.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being on GuyShrink, Dan. Folks, thanks for listening to us. We had a great conversation today about the science of revenge. James Kimball is the author of a fabulous book of research stuff. This is an opinion. This is research stuff with great conclusions about that forgiveness is the only way out of a vengeful heart. And we've talked about some meaty stuff. So thanks for listening to us. GuyShrink is on all the great platforms of podcasting. If you got a question or a comment or a review of this episode, drop me a line, bill@guyshrink.com, or put a review up on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. So thanks for listening, and we will see you the next time on GuyShrink. Thanks.